Cool, I got that saved, because it just, you know, it was like an hour, 20 minutes. I got that saved. I just wanted to make sure that thing saved, you know, all that got saved. Yeah, what I was talking about is, what's interesting is that a long time ago when swing music was happening, everybody was smoking marijuana as part of the culture of swing music, and it wasn't legal at that point. In the early, you know, part of the century, you know, of the 19th century, of the 20th century, it wasn't illegal at that point. And they found that, you know, people were going to these dance halls and they started dancing together, doing drugs and alcohol together, and people started coming together, and that really scared, you know, America. So they made marijuana actually illegal, and there's actually a whole history documentary, I forget what it's called, on the history of marijuana, and you know, they're saying that, you know, that was a major, one of the senators that was really adamant in banning it, you know, said that it's going to, you know, bring, you know, the races together, and you know, and the main fear, back to Dr. Cress-Welsing, is that, you know, young European women might be having, you know, mixed babies, and them not wanting that to happen, they started putting laws down and banning, they banned the marijuana, and then also in New York, they banned dancing. They made it so that you had to actually get a license to dance. So, and people, you know, like when my friends that are from Europe and they come to the US and they come to New York, they hear about this whole thing that there's these cabaret laws, they're like, what, that's crazy, you have to have a license to dance in New York. So they made that so that only certain club owners could get a license to dance and they could segregate the clubs. So, you know, like when the swing era happened and everybody was dancing together, they put down that law where you have to have a cabaret license. So if it's, you know, let's say a small time juke joint randomly in Harlem and everybody's dancing, the cops could come in there and be like, sorry, you're shut down, we're gonna fine you, and you gotta stop this business right now. Unless you can pay us this money, get a license and approved by this council, who's usually all, you know, male, Caucasian descent. And so they had to, so in New York they had to get cabaret licenses. And those things, you know, just ended just recently, you know. I don't even know if it's still in the book. I don't think it's really on the books anymore, but they were still enforcing it in the late 90s. And my friend actually got arrested. A friend, he's an artist from Mexico named Moscow. He, you know, he was like kind of protesting, and he was spinning techno in a small bar. And, you know, the cops were in there and they were like, you know, you guys can't be throwing a dance party. And he was like, you know, and he kept playing the music, and, you know, they arrested him. They're like, turn the music off, you know, we're gonna arrest you, and they actually arrested him, which is crazy. Usually they just give the club a fine, or they, you know, if you get 3 fines, then they shut the club down or something like that. But, you know, it's just a crazy concept to think like dancing, you know, is actually legal, but within the context of the US, you know, I mean, in New York, not other parts of the US is totally different. But, you know, there were miscegenation laws that were saying that people couldn't get married, you know, and a lot of small towns have those laws that are still in the book. And even though they're really archaic, you know, a lot of those things are still in the book, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, so back to you know, the Hell on Earth thing is kind of interesting because you know, bringing people together is obviously, you know, positivity and, you know, a good thing, and, you know, separating people and conquering them is obviously a bad thing. So that's why, you know, a lot of the genres that we have today, we don't need these genres. Like, we don't need, you know, it's like, if we talk about EDM, I'm going to cross EDM out because, you know, electronic dance music, it's, you know, it's tautology, which tautology is, you know, the art of just creating words just to be saying stuff, or you know, to use some agenda or whatever. So, you know, we don't need a lot of those things. And, you know, I would like everybody that's listening to this to really think about, you know, when you walk into a record store or, you know, you're looking online, about the color of the people's faces, you know, because I'm from Milwaukee, which is actually a German town, and, you know, so I grew up, you know, on giving me sausages and bratwurst in school, and you know, when I was a little kid, you know, they, you know, maybe wear like lederhosen for Oktoberfest, and I'm like, what's Oktoberfest, you know? but like, you know, I was never taught about my own culture. I was only taught about like Oktoberfest and all that type of stuff, which is cool. But you know, it's better to, you know, teach kids everything and, you know, teach them their own culture, teach kids other people's cultures. But usually it's just one culture that's imposed on kids. So back to this, it's only one form of music is imposed on people and one way of looking at genres. So back to when I walked into this record store in Milwaukee. I was going to buy my cousin a CD for his birthday. This was back when people still bought CDs, like years ago. And you know, and there was two pop sections. I walked into the record store and it said pop and it said pop. And one pop was totally of European descent, and the other pop was totally African. I was like, wow, that's weird. You know, because you know, a lot of times I'll put pop over here, because usually, you know, let's say you take somebody that's an African artist and they're doing R&B and they're really big, like let's say, you know, somebody like Rihanna, they'll be like, oh, it's R&B or whatever. But if it's a, you know, European American artist, they'll be like, oh, it's pop. So like Justin Timberlake is a good example. If Justin Timberlake was African American, they wouldn't call him pop. They would say he's R&B. You know, if he was dark skinned, and they'd be like, oh, Justin Timberlake, you know, he's obviously doing R&B, but you know, and that goes again to show that genre is not, you know, based on the actual music. It's most of the time, sometimes it is, you know, mostly in techno it is, like when you're getting to refine things, you know, and refine beat styles, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time genre, you know, especially the big genres, those genres are you know, meant to divide people. So I walked into the record store and there's actually two types of pop, and it was really kind of crazy. So I'm looking at one pop and it's all white, other pop's all black, and you know, the only people that were integrated on the Caucasian side of the pop section were, I think it was Prince and Nerd and Pharrell's group and Michael Jackson. Those are the only three. It was like Prince, Nerd, and Michael Jackson, and then it was like, you know, 50 other artists like Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, you know, a million other artists on the pop side, and then the other pop side was like, you know, all the R&B basically. They weren't calling it R&B. You know, they're just like, oh, okay, this is black pop, this is white pop, and only those, you know, three get in the side. So that's what happens again, is that, you know, so they use Prince, Nerd, which is Pharrell's group, and Michael Jackson as tokens. It's like, oh look, pop is not totally, you know, a white thing. It's, you know, there's black artists that are pop too. And same thing with, you know, within dubstep, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, you know, there's, you know, all the big dubstep artists will say, oh, Skrillex, Scream, and you know, Nero, and Caspa, you know, these are all Caucasian male artists, you know, and women are totally excluded from all these things, which is, you know, a whole other story. You know, within the Hellenistic era, and that's continued on now, you know, women were being raped and villages pillaged, and, you know, all types of really bad things that have continued on until now. But, you know, women aren't really represented within, you know, the music industry or the touring circuit, which is really cool that my friend Shannon from Light Asylum just got to play here at this venue that's part of this gallery last week, and, you know, it's really good and empowering to see, you know, women being able to, you know, tour on their own and stuff like that, because most booking agencies, like if you go to the Tom Windish agency within the US, he's pretty much got a monopoly over, you know, all the groups that are pretty much like below the super pop radar. He's got like kind of all the middle ground groups. You know, it's all males. You know, males are, you know, you go to any rave and it's like, hey, we know there's female producers. You know, we know there's, you know, non-European producers, and it's like, why aren't those people making money? So, and that goes into like kind of a cultural, social Darwinism thing too within the music industry or the entertainment industry. And you got to ask yourself the question like, hey, well, does that just mean that Caucasian males are better producers than everybody else, and that's why they're making the most money? Because that's, if you leave it, if you don't answer these questions, then that's the only, you know, logic you can infer from that is like, hey, well, the best people are obviously getting paid the most money. So like, I think last night or a couple nights ago, David Guetta, how do you pronounce the guy's name, from I guess he's from France, he got caught playing, faking a DJ set. You know, he was supposed to be DJing, and he was actually, you know, just playing a CD, and something happened with the tape skip, and I mean, the track skip, and he got caught. And, you know, he's making millions and millions of dollars. And back to the, you know, the top 25 DJs again, you know, the top 25 DJs, you know, are all male, and they're all, only like, I think, maybe Carl Craig is the only one that's African. And they're all techno artists, and we know that techno, you know, came from African artists, but, you know, it just goes to show that it's, once again, it's, you know, the conquering, you know, as Alexander conquered the world, to this day, European males are just conquering and appropriating, you know, genres from women and from minorities. So, you know, I know a lot of artists that just aren't playing shows because they're pigeonholed into these, you know, only a couple of slots. So you got to remember, if you have a festival that's this big, you know, there's only a couple of slots. Like, for instance, I don't know if any of you have heard of Lee Skratch Perry, but Lee Skratch Perry, I'm going to write his name really big. Lee Skratch Perry, you know, he kind of invented a lot of the sounds of techno effects music today. Like, he, you know, even though, you know, King Tubby and people like that came before him, you know, he basically created a lot of techno music and of using effects and delays and you know, using all those things in the beats. Whereas, you know, the rock people, like, you know, the psych rock, the Pink Floyd type of stuff, they all use those techniques, but he was kind of segregated out of that. He also was responsible for a lot of Bob Marley's hits. And all the biggest Bob Marley tunes, a lot of times Lee Skratch Perry made those. But anyway, he's one of the godfathers of electronic music. He's from Jamaica, but, you know, most people haven't really heard about him, and most people, you know, and he's not, you know, I don't think he's ever played Sonar. Like, let's say I'm going to take Sonar, for instance. That's one of the biggest electronic music festivals in Europe, and he's never played that, you know. And meanwhile, Marianne Hobbs, she's a DJ from the UK. That's a Caucasian female that's got blonde hair. She's played Sonar 3 times, you know, and that's one of the biggest music festivals in the world. So that just goes to show that the people that are being represented in the festivals, you know, and the people that are being, you know, given the most money aren't the people that are actually, you know, making the classics. You know, a lot of times it just happens to be the people that have, you know, the most money to already start with, or the people that just have the, you know, the strongest, you know, forceful nature of being able to go into an industry and appropriate things, you know. But music, you know, appropriation is also part of music as far as borrowing and sampling and things like that, and that goes back to the hip-hop DJ and you know, taking a sound and manipulating that sound and creating something new out of it. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but, you know, when it becomes a monetary thing, right? Yeah, when it becomes a monetary thing, you know, it actually can become a problem. So now that we've, you know, I've explained these problems, the main answer, the thing that we've got to, you know, really focus on doing for the future, and changing the future, is just to look at solutions that can help bring people together. And, you know, so solutions that can help bring us together is eliminating, you know, unnecessary genres that aren't based actually on music, and also doing a lot of statistical analysis. Statistical analysis is going to help us in the future as well, and by that I mean looking at the, you know, as we know, like in the world, you know, maybe, what do they say, like the top 1%, you know, has, you know, most of the money, and the bottom billion, you know, have the least amount of money or whatever. We've got to look at all these things and kind of look at a holistic approach and realize that it's not just within banking or this and that, but it's also within the music industry. So, because a lot of times I've got a lot of friends that are, you know, really proactive in the political scene, and they're like, oh, the banker's this, the banker's that, and this and that, and they'll, you know, talk about the food companies and the FDA or the drug companies, and talk about, you know, all the inequality that's going on. But then they'll just go to a rave, and they'll be at a rave where the whole lineup of the rave will go to Coachella, where it's totally, you know, discriminatory too. So, you know, there hasn't been a civil rights movement within the entertainment industry yet. You know, there's been, within the US, there's been civil rights movements within, you know, schools and housing and, you know, things of that nature, or even around the world. But as far as the entertainment industry, you know, there hasn't been any type of real movements for equality. So, you know, I've created an organization called Ending Discrimination in the Arts, and, you know, you're welcome to like that on Facebook. And that's an organization that's set up to bring, you know, equality for women and for people of color, because, you know, it's pretty much non-existent. Like, you know, there's a lot of, you know, festivals. You know, festivals these days are the only place that, besides contracts, like signing a deal with Nokia or Samsung like that, if a music artist wants to get paid, or you know, an artist wants to get paid, they usually have to go to you know, a festival. But once again, like I was saying, the festivals are divided by race, and you know, there might only be a few R&B, rap, reggae, and jazz festivals, whereas you know, which limits the number of you know, shows that, you know, non-European artists can get. So basically what's happening is that, you know, it's really more of the, I would say, you know, most of the European Union and the rest of the world kind of looks at the UK, I'm gonna write the UK right next to Alexander's name, because they're the ones that are kind of carrying on the Latin conquering tradition and, you know, stealing people's music and, you know, renaming it, just like, you know, somebody might steal somebody's book and erase the things and rename it. Yeah, so back to that appropriation. So all this kind of is coming from the UK. And like most of the big magazines, like the NME, you know, like I would say the UK press writers, as well as the US press writers, have the most influence. And since they have the most influence, then, you know, you can realize that, you know, it kind of disseminates out from there. So people in Italy and people in Spain, and people in Greece and people in Germany are looking at what the UK press writers are writing. And the UK press writers, you know, being controlled by the crown, like having that influence, is the only, you know, real medium for people to be able to play their music in the UK is through BBC, and that's controlled by the Queen of England, who, you know, is basically a subsidiary again of Alexander the Conqueror. They are, you know, more prone to, you know, be discriminatory. And, you know, so that being said, you know, if you look at all of, let's say you take a rave, you know, I like going to raves, and, you know, there'll be different rooms in a rave. You know, there'll be the down-tempo chill room, and then, you know, there's a room that's like the hardcore gabba room, and the room that's like, you know, a whole other room. And these raves, you know, are really great things, but the raves aren't integrated. And that just goes back to my main point, is that, you know, the music industry now is just as segregated, if not more segregated, as it was in the 50s, because, you know, or the 60s or the 20s. You know, so it's like if you look at rock and roll, since we've got some new people in the audience, I'm kind of you know, backtracking a little bit. You know, every successive generation has you know, created different genres to segregate people, and that's basically what I'm talking about. Is that genres are used to not just define how music sounds, but usually a genre is created to, like, keep a status quo, which means keeping a status quo is that term for keeping things the same. And so let's say you have a society where, you know, and that's meaning being conservative. So, you know, if you got a society where, you know, this one group of people in power, which tends to be, you know, people of the Caucasian diaspora, the European diaspora, keeping, whether it's, you know, Africans or Turkish people or Moroccans or, you know, whoever, keeping them, or Mexicans, keeping them, you know, different nationalities segregated, you know, because they don't want the mixing of people, because, you know, in the 50s, when the rock music first started coming out, you know, you had people like Little Richard, who all the women were like, oh, Little Richard, he's so great. So the publicity people, they created Elvis. They like, okay, well, we've got a guy that can do kind of like what he's doing, so we're going to put Elvis out there so that young Caucasian women aren't putting posters of Little Richard on their wall, or in today's world, Lil Wayne on their wall, you know, so then they'll, you know, create, you know, even though I like Eminem, I think Eminem's great, but, you know, the press will fund, you know, fund European male artists, because basically what they want is for people not to come together and not to mix, and they basically are seeking to you know, keep like racial purity, and through keeping a genre, you know, raves are where people meet, and, you know, parties where people meet, and you know, if they can keep those parties separate, they can keep the black club over here, the African club over here, if they can keep those parties over here, and they can keep them separate through the press and through the media and through television and magazines and different media outlets, that's the main goal of keeping people segregated. So my main point is that we need to come together and, you know, break down a lot of the genres and a lot of the you know, the segregations to you know, to make a better future for the world. And earlier I was talking about, you know, all these, this is Egyptian music notation, where they were using colors and the size of circles to represent sound, and this is like West African music notation, and, you know, Arabic music notation, Tibetan, Byzantine from Russia. We're not taught any of this stuff in school, and this is the only thing that we're taught in school is like, oh, this is the only type of music notation, which is like the modern, you know, the modern Western style. But that's just one out of, you know, a lot of different styles. And, you know, so we're only, you know, through colonialism, we're only taught really one type of notation. And for the new people that have just walked in too as well, you know, this is the turntable. I invented a system of notation for DJ music, and I've actually, most institutions in the US are, you know, haven't really given me much press, and it's great to be here in Germany where I can, you know, speak freely, whereas in the US, you know, they're just trying to fund more, you know, Lil Wayne and 50 Cent stuff. You know, I respect those guys as artists, but a lot of times they don't want people to know about, you know, new forms and new systems. So this is a system of notation for all forms of DJ music that's based on waves and calculus. You know, you don't have to learn calculus to do it, but it's just based on waves. So if somebody's scratching the record back and forth, this is forward, this is backwards. So I'm gonna write forward. And then down the hill is backwards. Cool. Do you guys have any questions? Any people?
A whole bunch, man.
Yeah.
All right. Firstly, you keep saying like you respect artists like Lil Wayne and so on and so forth. I have no respect for them.
Oh yeah.
And from the way you sit and from the way your face looks, it looks like you don't really either.
Well, no, yeah, I'm saying I have respect for them in a like a general respect. Like, hey, I have respect for, you know, all humans. I have respect for humanity. You know, like I have love for humanity. So I mean it more like that. Like, not that I'm listening to it all the time or anything like that. But yeah, I believe that they're puppets that are being manipulated to you know, bring people's to divide people. Oh yeah. So okay, keep going.
Because like because we're talking
about get the microphone.
All right, man.
You're talking to the whole world.
Cool. Hi.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about equality, which you were just talking about,
we can come over here because you can be able to see.
You
can see yourself. Yeah. Walk around here. Yeah. See, look, you'll see yourself in the thing right there.
Ah, it's badass.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, cool. So we'll walk here. Yeah.
Wow, is this like a podcast? Am I like world famous right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're talking about equality and you're saying you respect people as individuals, but you don't respect them as artists in the first place, just as a personal note, maybe you're not saying you respect them as artists because they're not preaching the equality that you're talking about in the first place. But onto the note that you were last talking about, which was generally racial equality, talking about white Caucasians, or people supporting white Caucasians, or the press and the media supporting white Caucasians more. What would you think about it being more financially driven rather than racially driven? Because finance tends to revolve around Caucasian males generally, and purchasing parity and purchasing power generally comes from that sector of society. So as opposed to it being a racial derivative now, it's I would, just as an idea, what would your idea be? It being a financial derivative, so it's got actually very little to do with race now, more to do with the fact that they're the ones that ended up with the money. The rest of us are. Taking myself on that, please.
I think that it's all intertwined. Like I'm taking a holistic approach, so I think that you can't really separate race and economics because they made the money through racism, and they still make, so the reason why that, Caucasian males are on top now, as far as having all the world's resources, because of, I was speaking of Alexander the Great, I erase his name because really he's Alexander the Conqueror, he's Alexander the Murderer, and through, pillaging and colonialism, and, let's say within the American context, slavery was able to put all, they got 300 years of free labor, so now they're the richest guys in the world, and they run everything. So I think that you can't really, I know a lot of socialists, my friends that are socialists, they will say that, well, it's really more about economics now and not necessarily race, but I don't think you can ever divide anything from anything. Like, one part might have more play, but if it was more about economics, then it would be, then the fruits of that would show, the race wouldn't be involved in that, but since it's pretty much race ends, like you can't take sex from it either, it's like, sex is about it, the women don't have any wealth in the world, like they probably have like 1% of the world's wealth or something, and so it's all, I think it's all together. So I think that the people that are the billionaires are, it's like, like let's say Bill Gates, for instance, his father was actually head of Planned Parenthood, which and he's big on vaccinations in Africa and like spreading plagues and things like that, and depopulating the world and all those other things. I think it's part of how they maintaining their wealth is based on racism, sexism, and just being mean. Just being mean people. I would say racism is a subset of anybody that's an aggressor is going to be a racist and a sociopath and a sexist and a rapist and you know what I'm saying? So all that's, the people that are somebody that's the conqueror that's just going to rob somebody and drop a bomb and take their books and take their cultures or genres or whatever and rename it and do, devious things. They're doing everything that's devious. So like, if you take a Machiavellian approach, like Machiavelli, a Machiavellian person is going to do anything in their power. So race is just one extension of that. So and sex is one extension of that. So they're stepping into any type of environment. They're going to, that's just one wing, one tentacle of their expansion. So so economics is a medium, and race is a medium as well. You hear anything?
Oh yeah. So you were saying let's go back to the festival, a whole bunch of festival things.
Yeah.
I'm seeing posters for festivals everywhere with a whole bunch of artists who I've never heard of, and we were in Budapest recently, and we saw a poster A8 size or whatever, A2 size, and it was 30 artists on there, not a single one I heard of. Which I actually didn't think was a very good thing to start with, but now that I'm listening to you, it's actually maybe not such a bad thing, because if you don't need the big names to headline artists. If you can actually put together a whole bunch of people who don't get the press, or people who don't get who don't get signed, people who just make music, that's good for everybody. People getting quality music, and they're hopefully getting a little bit of coin, and they get to keep producing their thing. So maybe that's actually that's actually a positive way forward. I thought it was like quite a negative thing where people were just, it was like money grabbing, you know, like people were just trying to sell shows and make a couple of dollars just by signing absolutely anybody off the street, you know, like we'll take you, you, and you, and you. But now that I think about it, maybe it's actually like a positive step forward, because if you're taking a whole bunch of people and the people are still paying for festivals where they don't know like 3/4 or like, you know, 7/8 of the people who are actually playing them, it's progressive because you're hearing a whole bunch of genres and like styles that you would maybe never even explore, and you're hearing a whole bunch of artists who would never be getting their names out there.
Yeah, well, my reply to that, I think it's good for festivals to definitely like always bring in new artists. But I think it's good for them, you know, whether, you know, different festivals can have different types of, you know, they're curating. So, you know, they can be like, hey, we're a festival that focuses on, you know, like let's say Montreux Jazz Festival. It's like, hey, we're focusing on older artists and esteemed artists, where, you know, maybe Coachella or some other Sonar, you know, like, hey, we want these new artists, or a mix of old and new. But the thing is that usually within new artists, most of the festivals are actually, you know, it's actually a bad thing, I think, because anytime they're just kind of like, you know, bringing in new artists, like, for instance, I saw an article that said these are the top 25 DJs, the top 20, you know, and it was like Tiesto on top, and, you know, Daft Punk, who I love, you know, Daft Punk is dope, they're on top, and then like all these names of people who I heard of. But then I saw, but there was only one African American, you know, or person of non-European descent out of the whole top 25 of people that are like making over 6 million, you know. But then I saw one that said the top 25 DJs that are under 30. There was a new article that was like some magazine, and I was like, top 25 DJs under 30. So like that's all the new talent, and they were all Caucasian males. So the thing is that anytime somebody's always regenerating new stuff, it's usually the person on top, whoever's curating the festival, that is like, hey, yeah, this new person's coming, we'll bring in all these new people. But usually anytime they're circulating people in like that, those are people that usually probably appropriated something that somebody else already did, you know. Because I don't know if you were here before. Were you here when I was getting into reformism, stylism in classical?
No.
Okay, so this guy named Anthony Braxton came up with the idea that, you know, music is created, first it's the reformists who create a sound or an idea, and then the stylists come in, you know, so let's say like, you know, Juan Atkins, you know, creates a sound, or I forget the guy who made it, you know, but let's say, you know, Juan Atkins make a sound, and another guy comes in and capitalizes off of that and makes a bunch of money off of it, and then it makes a style out of it, you know, more of a style. So usually the reformists don't get paid, so then the stylists build on the reformists, and they usually get paid, and then as it kind of goes to the end of the spectrum of stylists, they're not getting paid as much as the, you know, in the classical world is where music stagnates, and then it becomes dead at the end, where it's just like, well, not that dead means bad, but, you know, classical music where you're just reproducing what somebody else produced. So usually when festivals are just bringing in new people, they're just bringing in, they're just bringing in like, oh, this is somebody that's new that sounds like somebody else that, you know, and people are just going to the radio because they just want to dance. They don't really care who's getting paid. But I think that we need DJ unions so that, you know, that just like, you know, because I'm a member of the Actors Union in the U.S., the Screen Actors Guild, you know, so the biggest actors all the way from, you know, Tom Cruise to the smallest background actor in a movie, we're all in the same union, you know, so part of the biggest actor's money goes to, you know, the retirement of a small actor. So once that can happen in the DJ world, you know, we got, let's say, you know, Tiesto makes $1 billion that year, part of his, you know, small fraction of his $1 billion can go to, you know, all these new artists, you know, or things like that. But since there is nothing like that, then what happens is a lot of times what's happening now with all those new artists is those artists are paying the people that are throwing the festivals to play. In LA, there's a thing called pay to play, and it doesn't really happen as much on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, you know, I had a friend once, she was like, hey, will you, I have to sell $500 of my tickets for me to even be able to play. Like, she had to pay the club $500 to play that night. So she was trying to, you know, the club's like, here's all these tickets, you sell the tickets, you know, for whatever you know, want to sell them for, but you got to give us $500 to get on stage. You know, so so a lot of times that's what's happening. So then it's just a bunch of rich kids, whoever has the money. That's why, you know, you see all these people like Avicii or, you know, all these people that are just coming out of the woodwork. I'm like, who's Avicii? Like, you know, I teach, you know, I give private, you know, DJ lessons and music theory, electronic lessons, and I had this one student, he was like, yeah, you ever heard of Avicii? And I was like, no, I've never heard of him. He's like, who's this new guy? But, you know, so the only people that can just come out of the blue like that are usually rich people, and that's and it goes back to it's usually Caucasian males that they're like, hey, somebody that's rich can say like, hey, I'm gonna take this $15,000 and give it. I don't even care if, you know, because once you invest a lot of money into something, then you start to see a return. So they can give a festival promoter like, here's $10,000 for yourself, and then that festival promoter's like, okay, yeah, I'll put you on the top list in this Bulgaria, you know, festival. Yeah, you're number 3. The lineup. So like, let's say for instance, Mark Ronson. You know Mark Ronson? His first album, he lost $1 million. He never started making money until Amy Winehouse. His first album, because he was coming from money, so he paid Ghostface probably, you know, he had Ghostface in his first album. You know, he probably like, here, Ghostface, here's $20,000 to rap on my beat. You know, and he paid all these people, and his whole album costed $1 million, and it didn't make any money and nobody liked it. And then he started putting more money and he gave Amy Winehouse some money and it blew up. So the thing is, so that means that the people that have a lot of money are more apt to have a dominant effect in being that new artist, because these days, you know, they can just, you know, especially since, you know, all these magazines are closing down, like, you know, Spin magazine closed down, everybody's closing their actual printing. So now everything is just publicity and blogs and just people handing each other, whoever, it's just all media money. People actually are paying to play. So I have a friend, I think it might have been Hot Chip, and Hot Chip was telling people like, hey, if you give us $5,000, you can open for us. So then it's like, so a bunch of rich kids, you know, like, hey, yeah, hell yeah, I want to open for $5,000, I got $20,000 in my bank, here's $5,000. So then it's like, oh, now Hot Chip's touring, and Hot Chip's like, hey, yeah, they got 5,000 extra bucks, you know. And so that whole new thing of circulating new talent kind of is lopsided towards people that have more money, because, you know, somebody's like, hey, I'm a dope artist, I make all these, listen to sound, this is my press release, and this is my demo. They don't have the, you know, or I have, you know, maybe I have all these views on the internet and people have my buzz. It doesn't even matter, because if they don't have the money, then, you know, yeah.
Oh yeah, man. On that point, you were talking about the social rights movement within music itself. Yeah. And then just think of it that way. It's like maybe just like a financial shift. So what we're now talking about is like the actual the breakdown of the music industry, where it literally just can't keep up with a social trend. Because how do you sell someone who's going to put out like one song, who's going to put out one hit or one album, or who isn't even, you know, who just makes some shit in his garage, you know, just for a little bit of fun, or, you know, like in his room. You're never going to sign him because he's probably not going to make another thing. You know, he's just having fun, playing around, and you manage to put out a banger of a tune, which is kind of how like the dubstep movement even started. Now it's turned into this like Transformers having sex sound. But how do you know, like, so the entire industry maybe has to shift, because you're not going to be able to sign people who aren't going to produce you money in the long term. So you're saying, I hope, well, this pay-to-play thing that's going on in clubs, well, I hope that stays on the West Coast, because like, that sounds like
it's all over the world.
Really?
Magazines, everything.
Okay, well, yeah, for that I get that, but I haven't heard of it in clubs.
Blogs, like, you know, another instance, for example, like Vice magazine, you know, they're really big. I mean, now they're, like, they got bought up by Viacom, you know, they have Noisy, so like now if you're an artist, only big artists can really come, like big, you know, more progressive style artists, not like super pop, they have to come through Noisy. If you're not coming through Noisy as a filter, then you're just some random person on YouTube just like everybody else. You know, so, and Vice, they used to come out with compilations. It was like you know, they used to come out with 10-track compilations or 15 tracks back when they were still making their magazine, and or focusing on their magazine. And you had to pay to get on that CD compilation. So like, I remember they had a compilation that, oh, it's M82, it's this group, Vietnam, this to that. All those groups paid them like $5,000 each to be on that magazine. Just like how an advertiser, if you want a page in a magazine, that's how things are now. If you want a page in a magazine, then it's like, hey, you want to be on page 1 and have a full page, you got to give us $17,000 or $5,000 for a full page. For a half page, it's $4,000, page 30 or something. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, that's what they kind of revolutionized that concept with CDs, and they were like, back when we were still listening to CDs, they're like, oh, well, each of these artists they actually had to pay. They had to pay to play. So, you know, on West Coast, it happens in actual gigs and small time circuit. They do pay to play, but once you get out of the small time circuit, it's pay to play everywhere. Yeah.
And that maybe the question is, where actually is the money? So like, the promoters are promoting to like kids who kind of listen to pop, or like go out to clubs and listen to Avicii, or like, you know, that's where the money is. I don't mean to use racism, but like it's kind of in the rich white kids, right? You know, let's put their makeup on, buy a couple of beers, you know. And if they're spending the money, then of course advertisers are going to be advertising to them, and they're going to be promoting to them. So maybe it's like we've got to find a shift in like how we can support the artists. Because then we can find a way to sell music to people, or to finance people to make music without having to promote the crap out of it, or without having to get the like small time guys to actually pay to get any kind of promotion. And it's the same thing like if I'm going to a festival, I look at who's headlining, because like the small guys I haven't heard of, and I'm not going to sit down on YouTube for like 4 hours and listen to like everybody's on the list.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. I kind of agree with that in the sense that you know. Festivals should reflect the people that are going to the festivals, but the thing is that there's a big distortion, because what festivals do, like I remember, I think this year, this is Coachella this year, and you know, Coachella's one of the big festivals in the U.S., and they had, you know, they put 2 Chainz was playing at it, and Grizzly Bear was playing at the festival. And Grizzly Bear's like, you heard of Grizzly Bear? It's like, you know, indie rock, kind of, not that big. Like if you go to YouTube, you know, maybe they have video, 150,000 views or something like that. You know, maybe they have 1 million, but they put Grizzly Bear's name is bigger than 2 Chainz. They're like 2 Chainz, and then, you know, but meanwhile 2 Chainz is like millions of views. Like there's little babies on YouTube singing 2 Chainz songs, you know, and he's got 2 Chainz, you know. So what I'm saying is that like reality now, the size of an artist is based on, you know, you have to base the size of something on something rational, like be it YouTube views, Facebook likes, things like that. Even though people, you know, are using robots to distort those things, YouTube does a pretty good job at curtailing that. And I don't know if you noticed that a couple of months at the turn of last year to this year, they deleted billions of views on YouTube because they were just faking it and having, you know, legions of laptops with multiple web browsers open and with robots giving fake comments and stuff like that. I don't think SoundCloud monitors it, so that's why I don't even deal with SoundCloud, because it's fake. A lot of it's fake. A lot of the comments and stuff are fake. But the festivals aren't. What they're doing is to maintain, you know, the Caucasian male on top. You know, in the tradition of Alexander the Conqueror, they're anytime an African artist comes out, usually what happens is, or non-Caucasian artists, is that those artists are really pushing themselves up by their own strings, like you know, and really making it on their own. But the Caucasian artists, they're giving them a special hand because they don't want, you know, kids to get mixed, and they don't want Turkish people mixing with the non-Turkish people, and they want to keep the lines separate. So if you want to keep those lines separate, then you're going to always prioritize those people and try to make the non-whites the smallest names in the list. You know, so that's a lot of times when an artist is dealing with the promoter, they're mainly seeking to get their name as big as possible, and that's what the agents and the managers are dealing with. Like, hey, my name's too small on the list, I'm not going to play this thing or whatever. You know, it's like it's all about getting your name rising up and getting it bigger and bigger, and getting your value up and appreciating your value, you know, within the music industry. But you know, if you have more money, you can inflate yourself from the beginning. You can just be like, hey, I'm going to come out on top because I can pay this magazine to put me on the front cover. You know, like some people can just come out and be, you know, on the front cover. It's like my friend, you know, Nick Zinner from the AAS, you know, it's like he kind of just came out. They kind of just played a couple shows and came out on top, you know. Meanwhile, my friend Connor Oberst, his Bright Eyes, Bright Eyes, you know, he really did it himself. Like he just playing shows and really small clubs, and you know, he just did it himself, and he wasn't just, you know, dropping that money like that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but I think as far as festivals reflecting the people, I think that, like, let's say within the U.S., you know, that's why I was giving the 2 Chainz example. Hip hop is $1 billion industry, but the hip hop artists aren't getting paid. Like Timberland's never played Sonar. So like think about how, you know, like Timberland's had the biggest impact on music of anybody that I can think of in the past, you know, 15, 20 years, and he hasn't, you know, it's like he should be playing just as much as like Tiesto's playing if he's that, big of a thing. But hip hop producers are only making money through, you know, production deals and contracts. They're not getting paid as far as like live shows. It's only Caucasian males that are getting paid, like for the festivals and the tour circuit. So like, you know, Avicii, maybe he's had some hits. I don't really know his hits, but if you compare those hits to, you know, like a hit by, you know, like Timberland, for example. Timberland spins techno, he DJs, he plays, you know, but they're not booking him. He's not getting booked at, you know, you don't see like, oh look, Timberland live in Berlin, you know, or Timberland live in whatever. But, you know, so there's a distortion that's going on. So the distortion is you know, sided towards the European male. But as far as festivals representing people, I feel that like they definitely should. So like if, you know, but then that would mean that, you know, within, you know, let's say you've got a festival like in London, you know, there's a big Indian community. So then it's like, okay, well, MIA is the only one that's representing the Indian community. It's like there should be like 50 other artists, or there should be a whole Indian room if there's a, you know, 5-room rave or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So the minorities still aren't being, you know, represented. And now we're transitioning. I don't know if you know, in the U.S., this was the first year that Caucasian people had a 0 growth rate. More people died than babies were born. And so, you know, the future of the U.S. is going to be, you know, Caucasians as the majority. You know, it's going to be mostly Spanish and African Americans as the majority. But everything, the media still is by far doesn't anywhere near represent the real numbers. Like in the U.S. right now, Mexicans are like almost 30% of the population, maybe they're 20% of the population. But if you turn on TV, they're not 20% of TV shows or 20% of raves or 20%. But so I personally think that if somebody is doing paying out of their own pocket and it's an independent thing, then they can curate however they want. But if you're getting government funding, which most European clubs and raves, probably places are getting subsidized by the government, then it should reflect the people statistically, I feel like. And that's what we have in the U.S. is form of quotas within the workplace and within the collegiate world, but it's not in the entertainment world. There's no real quotas, you know. So I feel like the raves and all those things, the festivals should have quotas. Like, you know, if your population is 19% Turkish, then there should be like somehow reflecting. You know, there should be slots for 19% of that party should be, you know.
You got time for one more
Yeah,
question?
yeah, what do you want? Yeah.
I mean, that's going into the ratio economics of it. I've got 2 questions on that. Can it be that you say, like, let's say 20% of the American population is Mexican?
Yeah.
Do Mexicans spend 20% of the money they can spend on entertainment? Because
sometimes more.
Okay.
So within the movies, like raves are a little bit different. You know, like within movies, everybody goes to movies. You know, but you know, raves. You know, it's like you can say more it's the wealthy kids that are going to be like, oh, I'm spending $150 to go to to go to the this overnight 2-day thing, and you know, out in the middle of nowhere or something. And yeah, that makes sense. That like, hey, that person gets to curate. But even within that world, you know, the fact is that most genres within the music world are created by African American people or African Caribbean, or you know, for the UK, so like whether it's the techno, the hip hop, or the jungle, like all these genres I was talking about before. You know, pretty much every genre of the 20th century, you know, was created by the African diaspora. So like, whether it's jungle or, you know, hip hop, techno, breaks, you know, everything, grime, dubstep, all this, like, you know, like hip hop, you know, Dead Prez was the first to, like, why can't Dead Prez play a dubstep rave, you know? Or why can't Wiley play a dubstep rave? Yeah. But dubstep means that you're European, you know? And then they give, you know, Binga as like the one token. They're like, okay, well, you know, because every time they do that, they have to make a token. So like, you know, EDM is a perfect thing. I was talking about EDM, you know, and it's like, oh, electronic dance music, but it's like, wait a minute, the whole history of techno has always been electronic and dance. So that genre just means nothing, but all the people that are at the top, electronic dance music is just a new way of being like, oh, okay, everybody's into dubstep, and okay, this is, you know, European, Caucasian males of Caucasian descent, and they're making electronic music. But the festivals, if you look in the US, you know, walking down the street, some African American might pay $150 for their shoes, while a Caucasian person, even if their dad makes 10 times more, they may just be paying $50 for the shoes. So a lot of times, poorer people sometimes are actually the bigger spenders. So spending doesn't actually necessarily correlate with you know, the amount spent doesn't necessarily correlate with their income, because a lot of times, you know, sometimes people that are more impoverished or just don't have as much money want to escape, so then they're going to pay for that entertainment. But usually there's no outlets for that. So like, you know, because you know, like a lot of reggae artists were banned from the UK, you know, for the homophobic stuff. But the thing is that, you know, which is a bad thing for them to be homophobic, but I think it's also a bad thing for them to be banned, and you know, any artist, you know, to necessarily be banned if they're not banning everybody that's doing the same thing, you know. Like I was giving an example, like, you know, grime was banned because the guy got stabbed, and they're like, oh, you can't play this song, and they banned grime. Meanwhile, it's like Pantera played in like Russia, and 30 people got killed, and you know, and it's like, hey, Pantera never has any problems, you know, getting shows or getting blocked by promoters or countries or anything like that, you know, because, you know, meanwhile, if Pantera was, you know, Turkish or something, and 30 people got killed at a show, then they'd be like, oh, you shut down, and they wouldn't let them play anywhere, you know, that type of thing. So I think that what happens is that you know, so if we have a country like, you know, Austria that is not very diverse, then yeah, it makes sense for a rave to not be that diverse, you know, which is in a lot of smaller countries. But you know, if you have a country, you know, anytime it's government subsidized, I think it should reflect the people. So you know, and it's obviously not, you know. And reflecting the people would be 50% women too, right? So you would think that, you know, like, how many women are going to that rave? You know, it's like, even if you have a country that's, you know, pretty much, let's say it's 90% Caucasian or something, it's still 50% or 52% women. So technically, you know, it's like women should be like, hey, like, we want more, you know, there's female bands out there, there's female techno producers out there, but they're just being, all the guys are like, just being way more aggressive and doing things to get ahead of them, and you know, it's kind of unfair. That's why I feel like, you know, there should be unions and different organizations that are curtailing that. You know, not to say that things should be perfectly 50% or whatever, but you know, it should, you know, reflect, you know, reality. So I created an organization called Ending Discrimination in the Arts, and so anytime, you know, like let's say a new festival comes out, we're looking at, you know, the population of that country or that, you know, place, and relative to, you know, the number of people that are there, you know, or, you know, women are.
Yeah, that pretty much answered it.
Oh, okay.
So like we've discussed like a lot of the problem, but like what are the solutions? Like how do we move forward from here, and how do we actually how do we grow and keep producing good music or quality music that people want to listen to, the artists themselves want to produce? Because I don't think a lot of large name producers actually want to produce what they're producing. And how does not only the music community but as a society we grow forward and we move past these problems?
Yeah, or a lot of artists are actually just paying other people to produce it. They're actually producing it. But I think the solution is lawsuits. I think with suing people, you know, whether it's like, hey, this group of people is suing this group of people to get, you know, I think a lot of think lawsuits are a really good way, because a lawsuit is something that's, you know, if they can prove it in court, they can, they can prove that this one particular business is being discriminatory. So if it's a particular bit, so if it's like, hey, a group of 30 Turkish artists come together and they're like, hey, you know, I don't know what the percentage of populations they are here, but it's like, hey, there's all these government-funded raves and we're not being represented. If they can, sue, and if they can win, then, then that's one good way. Protesting, is a good way too, and just putting that within the music or whatever. But, I feel like lawsuits are probably the best way, because as far as like within the American context, most civil rights things happen legally, so it's more of I think legal is the strongest way. So women coming together and be like, hey, we're not gonna, and boycotting too. Boycotting is another way of being like, hey, we're not gonna, if women came together and be like, we're not gonna, support this festival unless, we see more female artists, and then they can use their money to, and in that festival, they would lose half of their audience, and that'd be a big thing.
Yeah. Could half of the problem be most people don't actually know there's a problem? So you're saying like people come together and protesting and boycotting. I just feel like I care, but I feel like a whole bunch of people wouldn't care. Yeah. Like a whole bunch of people just like, hey, not only they don't care, a lot of people don't know. So like, how can you move forward if you don't know? How can you change if you don't know that there's a problem? Or like, what happens if you blatantly don't notice that all the artists, most of the artists are Caucasian and male? And it leads to stigma thinking only Caucasian males produce this style of music, and only African Americans produce this style, and only Turkish people produce this style. So like the genres themselves are like lend themselves to different cultures, and thus you don't even see that there's a problem. You think like, you have to throw a hip hop festival to get African Americans, and you have to throw a dubstep party to get the white geeky kids, and like this, that, and one other. Like how can we make it? So how can we put the problem out there so people actually see that there is a disparity? Whereas as opposed to just promoting the status quo, because you're saying like protests and lawsuits and so on and so forth. As I said before, if you don't know there's a problem, you can't fix it.
So yeah, I'll say, let me read this to see.
And on that same note, like if we're going to say on the gender movement, not only would I think a lot of women not really notice that there's not a lot of artists on the list, they may just not care. They say, look, we're going to go see some good music anyway. Like why would we protest? Whereas like I see the fundamental point of saying, actually it should be coming from women as well, because then we've got a different diversity, we've got like a different way of doing things. And it's going to lead to more growth. So we're not just having like one sector of society pushing us forward, or like pushing us in one direction, not necessarily forward, when we can all go forward together. But how do we show people that, or like
Yeah, so I would say that all these things can work together. Exposing things through social media, that's one thing. Statistics as well. Statistics are important, because statistics can, as far as the lawsuits, statistics support the lawsuit. So if it's a minority, I'm going to write minority. And I'm going to write, let's say, women per se. So, it might be hard to get 50,000 people to protest. So, but 50 artists can sue somebody and do a big thing. That's why. So that's why all the other stuff can just support that. So yeah, that wraps things up. And see what I'm saying? So yeah, lawsuits. You only need 50 people, to do a class action lawsuit to sue an institution. So that's why it's like 50 Turkish groups can come together, or 50, African groups can come together and sue a magazine, or sue a festival, or sue a booking agency, or sue a promoter. And then, you know, people see that one lawsuit and they're like, whoa, this article comes out and social media can spread it. So yeah, definitely groups of people aren't going to do that because most groups of people just follow whatever the masses or whatever the mags or the festival people give them. But, you know, a group of 50 women, female bands coming together and forming an organization and suing, you know, like, hey, we're 50 female bands from Bulgaria, you know, even with, you know, the riot group, I don't want to mention the first part of their name, but from, you know, Russia, even like protests like that, you know, they made a big impact, you know, in women's rights and power. So, you know, if it's minorities that are being oppressed, then, you know, lawsuits are I'd say, the strongest way, because in that changing the legal world changes the actual, you know, world, you know, and then that means promoters scared. They're like, well, if I come out with this festival, maybe they're gonna, you know, they won that case over there in that country, or that state, you know, within the same country, then it makes them, that next promoter, more scared to be like, you know, because now they're not scared, because they're just like, hey, I can do whatever I want, and all this shady stuff. So people getting arrested for, you know, putting money under the table, or, you know, bribery and what do you call it? You know, manipulating numbers and manipulating figures and things like that. So just, I would say people getting the law into it. And that wraps it up. That's taking too long. All right. Thank you, Berlin. Good night. Get a close-up of it. Close up of this. I'm just getting the screen.